Okay, so strap in, everybody, because today we are going deep on Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Head of the Wagner Group.
Yeah, the late head of the Wagner Group.
Right.
You guys send in a ton of material on this guy. His whole life story, like
Yeah.
early life,
Oh, yeah.
business dealings, all the way through to the Wagner Group.
Yeah.
And even these kind of cryptic ties to Putin that we're going to get into, it's a lot to untangle.
It is a lot. And he was a real chameleon, this guy. He's always kind of reinventing himself.
Yeah.
And to really get him, I think we need to look kind of past the headlines.
Yeah.
And analyze like the man behind the myth.
Yeah.
You know, was he a visionary leader? Was he just a ruthless opportunist? Or was he some combination of the two?
Yeah, and that's what we're going to try to figure out. Was he truly gifted or was he just a master grifter?
Right.
So to start off, his early life is kind of far from this image of like a patriotic military leader.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, when you think about it, it's pretty striking how much his later patriotism clashes with how he lived his life early on.
Right.
I mean, this is a guy who did 9 years in prison in the 80s.
Yeah.
For robbery fraud, even involving minors in criminal activity.
Wow.
Like, that's not
the resume.
Not the typical resume you see.
Yeah.
For someone who ends up
Leading a private army.
leading a private army.
Right. And so I think what's interesting is to look at how that background might have actually shaped his approach to power later on in life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Prigozhin was a survivor.
Yeah.
He knew how to work the system. He knew how to find the weaknesses. He knew how to manipulate people to get what he wanted.
Yeah.
And those were skills that were honed in the criminal underworld.
Right.
That ended up serving him extremely well.
Yeah, it's almost like his early life was a training ground for this world of Russian power politics. And speaking of power, he went from prison to building an absolute empire.
Yeah, he did. It is remarkable. He went from like selling hot dogs on the streets of St. Petersburg
Wow.
to owning this chain of upscale restaurants and eventually catering state dinners and earning that nickname, Putin's chef.
Putin's chef. And that nickname's more than just a catchy title.
Right.
It really points to this relationship that would become the foundation of Prigozhin's rise to power.
Absolutely. That connection that was formed back in the 90s allowed him to secure incredibly lucrative government contracts. So like his company Concord Management and Consulting went from catering to like supplying food to the Russian military.
And these weren't just your average mess hall meals.
No.
Right? Like there are allegations of serious corruption tied to these contracts.
Yeah, this is where the Anti-Corruption Foundation, led by Alexei Navalny, comes in.
Okay.
Their investigations revealed that Prigozhin's companies were allegedly overcharging the military for food.
Wow.
By as much as 50% in some cases. And sometimes even providing subpar or spoiled products.
So he's profiting off the very people that he's later going to try and position himself as a champion for.
It does raise the question of,
Yeah.
did his ambition outweigh his loyalty?
Yeah.
Or was this all part of some bigger, more complex game?
Right. That's a good question. And that's something that we are going to keep coming back to.
Yeah.
But, before we get into the whole Wagner Group thing, we see this pattern of him using these seemingly legitimate businesses as a springboard to power.
Yeah.
So was this a calculated strategy? Or was he just kind of seizing opportunities as they came up?
I mean, it's a great question. It's hard to say for sure, but what is clear is that Prigozhin understood the power of money and influence in post-Soviet Russia.
Yeah.
Like, he knew how to leverage those things to his advantage.
Right.
To build a network that spanned business politics and eventually the military.
So he's building this business empire.
Yeah.
Amassing wealth, amassing influence.
He's playing the long game.
He's playing the long game, but it's clear he's not content with just being a successful businessman.
Right.
And this is where the Wagner Group comes in.
Right. But even before the Wagner Group, he was already getting involved in that world of PMC's private military companies.
Okay.
He founded this security firm called Moran Security Group way back in 2004.
So the Wagner Group wasn't his first foray into this world.
Exactly. He was already building up experience in the private military sphere.
Interesting.
And then in 2014, the Wagner Group kind of explodes onto the scene during the annexation of Crimea.
Right.
And this group, initially shrouded in secrecy, quickly gained a reputation for its brutal tactics and effectiveness in combat.
We're talking accusations of war crimes, human rights violations, a level of ruthlessness that really becomes synonymous with the Wagner name.
Right.
And this is a far cry from catering those state dinners.
Yeah, this is where things take a darker turn for Prigozhin. He goes from Putin's chef to commanding a force that operates in these gray zones of conflict.
Right.
Carrying out missions that the Russian government doesn't want to be directly tied to.
Right. It makes you wonder, like, was this always his plan all along?
Yeah.
You know, to build up this private army as his own personal power base?
Was that the end game?
Yeah.
Was he just a tool being used by the Kremlin?
A pawn in a bigger game.
Right.
It's a good question. And to answer it, we need to understand the context of the Wagner Group's rise.
Yeah.
They emerged at a time when Russia was becoming much more assertive on the world stage, but also very wary of direct military intervention.
Right.
You know, so they needed this deniable force.
A way to project power without leaving fingerprints.
Yeah.
And Prigozhin, with his ruthlessness and his lack of accountability, was kind of the perfect guy for the job.
Yeah, so we've got this shadowy figure leading this private army, carrying out these missions in the shadows. And then comes 2022, the invasion of Ukraine. Initially, it seems like Prigozhin and the Wagner Group are totally on board, right?
Yeah, they play a key role in some of the early battles.
Yeah.
Including that brutal siege of Bakhmut.
Right.
Where their brutality and their disregard for casualties became infamous.
But then something really interesting happens.
Yeah.
Prigozhin, who had always projected this image of loyalty to Putin, starts publicly criticizing the Russian Ministry of Defense.
Yeah.
And he goes after Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu directly. Accusing him of corruption, incompetence, and failing to support the troops.
He took to Telegram to broadcast this message directly to the Russian people, bypassing all the traditional media channels.
It's a bold move, especially considering who he's criticizing.
It is.
So what's his game here?
Right.
Is he really concerned about the war effort, or is this just a calculated power play?
Is he a rogue actor?
Yeah.
A loose cannon challenging the establishment? Or was he perhaps serving some other purpose?
It's a puzzle. And it's about to get even more complicated because in June 2023, Prigozhin launches his rebellion.
He does.
He accuses the Russian military of attacking Wagner forces.
Yeah.
And he vows to march on Moscow to bring justice.
It was such a stunning escalation.
Yeah.
A moment that sent shockwaves through Russia and the whole world.
Yeah.
Thousands of these battle-hardened Wagner troops take control of Rostov-on-Don.
Yeah.
And they start advancing north towards Moscow.
It felt like Russia was on the brink of civil war.
It did.
You know, there were reports of clashes between Wagner and regular Russian troops.
Yeah.
Even rumors that Wagner forces had shot down Russian military aircraft.
The whole world was watching, holding its breath, wondering how far would Prigozhin go?
Yeah, how would Putin respond?
Right.
It was like this tense standoff, this high-stakes game of chicken. And then just as abruptly as it began, the rebellion ends.
It does.
Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko brokers a deal.
Yeah.
Prigozhin stands down his forces. The details of the deal remain murky.
Yeah.
But Prigozhin is allowed to go into exile in Belarus, seemingly avoiding any serious repercussions for his actions.
It was a strange resolution.
Right.
Like a man who just days before had been branded a traitor by Putin was allowed to walk away.
It left a lot of people scratching their heads, wondering what Putin's true motives were.
It did seem like a very calculated move.
Yeah.
A way to kind of diffuse the situation without bloodshed.
Yeah.
Perhaps with the intention of dealing with Prigozhin later on his own terms.
And that later came just 2 months later when Prigozhin died in a plane crash on August 23, 2023.
Yeah, the plane was this private jet.
Yeah.
Carrying Prigozhin and several other key Wagner figures.
Yeah.
Crashed in the Tver region northwest of Moscow.
And almost immediately suspicion fell on the Kremlin.
Oh, yeah?
You know, witnesses reported hearing explosions before the plane went down.
Right.
U.S. intelligence agencies later confirmed that they believed the crash was caused by an explosion. Likely a bomb planted on board. And the official Russian investigation concluded that the crash was an accident.
Right.
But few outside of Russia believe that Prigozhin's death was widely seen as an assassination orchestrated by Putin.
Yeah.
It's a chilling reminder of the ruthlessness at the heart of the Russian power structure.
It is.
But why wait 2 months?
Yeah.
Why not just eliminate Prigozhin during the rebellion?
Right.
And this leads us, I think, to the heart of what we're trying to unpack here. Was Prigozhin's death a necessary move to restore order?
Yeah.
Was it this cold-blooded act of revenge, or was it this calculated message sent to anyone who might dare to challenge Putin's authority?
Right.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
You know, from his criminal past to his meteoric rise as Putin's chef, to the Wagner Group's brutal exploits, and ultimately to his dramatic rebellion and suspicious death.
It's a wild story.
It really is. Prigozhin's story is one of ambition, betrayal, and violence.
But before we render that final verdict on whether he was a grifter or gifted, I think we need to dig deeper into the specifics of his operations, the accusations against him, and the impact he had on the world.
All right, let's do that. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into the world of Yevgeny Prigozhin.
I mean, Prigozhin's story really is like a masterclass in leveraging opportunity, whether it's in the criminal underworld or in the halls of power. I mean, remember, this is a man who went from hot dogs to hot cuisine. All the while building this network that would eventually stretch across continents.
And it's those government contracts, especially the ones with the Russian military, that really stand out. You know, we touched on the Anti-Corruption Foundation's findings earlier. But what exactly did they uncover? You know, it's one thing to win a contract, but it's another to allegedly exploit it so blatantly.
Well, Navalny's team really dug deep. And what they found was this pattern of systematic overcharging. So, for example, there were instances where basic foodstuffs, like potatoes and onions, were being billed to the military at 2 or 3 times their market value.
So not just a little padding here and there.
No.
We're talking significant markups. On essential supplies for the troops that he later claimed to champion. How did he get away with this for so long?
I mean, that's where his relationship with Putin really comes into play. The level of impunity suggests protection at the highest levels. It raises the question, was Prigozhin acting on his own? Or was he part of this wider system of corruption within the Russian military establishment?
It's a chilling thought that such blatant profiteering could be happening under the guise of patriotism.
It is.
But it also, I guess, speaks to Prigozhin's audacity, his willingness to exploit any situation to his advantage.
Absolutely, and this willingness extended beyond Russia's borders. Let's shift our focus now to Wagner's operations in places like Syria, the Central African Republic, Mali, Libya. These weren't just military deployments. These were strategic plays with far-reaching implications.
We've heard the term neocolonialism used to describe these activities. Can you unpack that a little bit? What exactly was Wagner's role in these countries? And how did it benefit Prigozhin and, by extension, Russia?
Well, neocolonialism in this context refers to the practice of exerting influence and control over other countries, often through economic or military means, without direct colonization. So Wagner essentially served as Russia's vanguard in Africa, propping up regimes, securing access to resources, and expanding Moscow's sphere of influence.
So it's not just about fighting wars. It's about securing access to valuable resources.
Exactly.
Things like gold, diamonds, uranium.
Wagner acted as a kind of geopolitical venture capitalist, securing these lucrative mining concessions, often through deals that raised serious questions about transparency and fairness. And in return, these countries received military support and a degree of stability, but often at the cost of their sovereignty.
It's a complicated dynamic.
It is.
This blend of hard power and economic opportunism. But this stability that you mentioned often came with a dark side. You know, we've seen countless reports of Wagner troops engaging in human rights abuses, torture, even massacres.
The atrocities committed by Wagner mercenaries are well documented. They operated with a level of brutality and impunity that really shocked the world.
And this raises, I think, a really critical ethical question. If a nation outsources its dirty work to private contractors like this, does it absolve itself of responsibility for their actions?
That's a troubling thought.
It is.
But I think it speaks to the very nature of plausible deniability. I mean, these actions, while technically carried out by a private company, ultimately served Russia's interests. And Prigozhin was the architect of this strategy.
It's a shrewd, albeit morally dubious, approach to power projection. And it makes you wonder, like, what did Prigozhin truly believe in? Was it Russia? Was it power? Or was it simply self-preservation?
That is a question that historians and analysts will be grappling with for years to come.
Yeah.
His motives were often opaque.
Right.
This mix of patriotism, ambition, and ruthlessness.
Yeah.
But one thing is clear.
What's that?
He was a master manipulator.
Yeah.
A man who understood how to exploit systems and people to achieve his goals.
It's a story that I think really highlights these blurred lines between state power, private enterprise, and organized crime in the 21st century.
Absolutely. And his death, far from providing any clear answers, has only made this whole puzzle more complex.
Right. We're left with a legacy that is as intriguing as it is disturbing.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. The alleged corruption, the strategic maneuvering in Africa, the shadowy world of private military companies.
Yeah.
But to really understand Prigozhin's legacy, I think we need to grapple with the reactions to his death.
I agree.
And what it reveals about his place in the Russian psyche.
That's exactly where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Join us as we explore the complexities of Prigozhin's legacy and what it tells us about the future of Russia.
You know, we've spent this whole deep dive uncovering these different layers of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the businessman, the warlord, the rebel.
Oh, right.
But his death, you know, shrouded in all this mystery and suspicion, it really added a whole new dimension to his story.
Oh, it did. It's fascinating how quickly those like makeshift memorials sprang up across Russia.
Yeah.
Flowers, Wagner, flags, portraits of Prigozhin. Almost overnight, he became like this folk hero to some people.
It's paradoxical, you know. Yeah. Here's a man accused of these heinous acts, deeply entangled in this corrupt system. Yet he's seen as this symbol of defiance. A truth teller who dared to challenge the elites.
Well, that's the real complexity of Prigozhin's legacy, right? He tapped into this deep vein of discontent in Russian society, this feeling of being ignored or betrayed by the system. And he spoke very plainly. He promised action. And he presented himself as a defender of the common man. Even while leading this private army accused of brutal war crimes.
And it's almost like his death amplified those sentiments.
It did.
You know, it fueled this whole narrative of a powerful, outspoken figure silenced by this ruthless regime.
Exactly. And it feeds into this long-standing suspicion of the Kremlin, reinforcing the idea that anyone who steps out of line, no matter how powerful, will be eliminated.
It makes it really hard for that official narrative.
Right.
That his death was an accident to gain any traction.
Absolutely.
So how does the Kremlin control his narrative? Can they just erase Prigozhin from the history books?
I mean, they can try. But I think the seeds of doubt have already been sown. His criticisms of the military, his daring rebellion, and now this very suspicious death have created this potent counter-narrative that is likely to persist.
Especially among those already disillusioned with the system.
Absolutely.
So could this ironically make him even more influential in the long run?
Yeah.
A martyr whose legacy fuels further dissent and instability?
It's a real possibility.
Yeah.
I mean, Prigozhin's death has created this void, a space for a new figure to emerge and capitalize on those feelings of discontent. We're already seeing far-right nationalist groups trying to claim his mantle, using his rhetoric and imagery to attract followers.
And that has to be a concern for Putin.
Oh, absolutely. Especially as Russia is dealing with this ongoing war in Ukraine. Economic sanctions, growing social inequality. I mean, Prigozhin's story, his willingness to challenge the status quo could embolden others to follow in his footsteps.
Even if they reject his methods.
Exactly.
So in a way, his rebellion, even though it ultimately failed, might have triggered a chain of events that could threaten Putin's grip on power.
It's a chilling thought.
It really is.
And it brings us back to our original question.
Yeah, grifter or gifted.
Was he a true believer in Russia's greatness?
Yeah.
A flawed patriot driven by this desire for a stronger nation?
Yeah.
Or was he ultimately just an opportunist, a master manipulator who exploited the chaos for personal gain?
It's a question that I don't think has an easy answer.
No, it doesn't.
He was likely a mix of both. This complex, contradictory figure who navigated this murky world of Russian power politics with this blend of ambition, ruthlessness, and maybe even this twisted sense of patriotism.
Right. Prigozhin's story, far from being this neat historical footnote, will
Yeah,
continue to cast a long shadow over Russia's future.
I think you're right.
It serves as a stark reminder that in the pursuit of power, the lines between loyalty, ambition, and violence can become dangerously blurred.
It's been a real deep dive.
It has.
We've explored the life and legacy of this man who rose from the shadows to challenge the very foundation of the system that created him.
Yeah.
Yevgeny Prigozhin, the chef who became a warlord, leaves behind this trail of unanswered questions.
A lot of questions.
And a legacy that's as fascinating as it is troubling.
I agree. His story serves as a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
A reminder that even in the 21st century, the allure of power can corrupt even the most gifted individuals, leaving behind a trail of destruction and uncertainty.
That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us as we explore the world of Yevgeny Prigozhin. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the life of a polarizing figure, seeking to answer the question, are they changing the world or just lining their pockets?